Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I'm one of your hosts, Bryant, with my permanent guest, Cammy. Welcome back.
Thank you. Welcome back to you as well.
Thanks. Cammy is being a trooper. She's not feeling super great, but she's here. So please send her T's and P's to recover and get through this head cold or whatever she's got going on, right?
Yes.
Because our weather is going kind of crazy here in October. But that's right. It is October. And as you know, Cammy, we have a theme. What is this theme? Can you explain it?
Sure. It's mostly just like a literary theme of things that were written. I think the latest one would probably be the 1800s. So we're not going super far back, but we're going into some kind of spookier stuff, some
Yeah.
mysteries.
Today, yeah, it's all like fictional characters. They all kind of, or fiction and their authors, because we talked about Sherlock Holmes and we have to talk about Doyle. Today, we're talking about Agatha Christie, who's known for her character Hercule Poirot, the egg-headed guy. And you can't really talk about him without talking about her either, because she's just as fascinating and was able to create this character. And she's pretty contemporary. Honestly, she died in the 70s, the 1970s. So, and she was reading Doyle and things like that. And Poirot was definitely modeled after him in a lot of ways. But yeah, so we're going to discuss a specific, interesting, spooky thing that happened in Christie's life, kind of early in her career, right after things had just started going off for her. So, Cammy, why don't you set the scene for us and regale us?
Okay, sure. First off, I used the New York Times paper chase when the world's most famous mystery writer vanished by Tina Jordan. And then historic-uk.com, The Curious Disappearance of Agatha Christie. It was early December 1946 when Agatha Christie's car was found, with the front wheels dangling over the edge of a pit in Guildford, England. All that remained in the vehicle were some articles of clothing and an attaché case filled with papers, no author to be found. By December 6th, 2 days after the woman left her Berkshire home, papers from London to New York were reporting the mystery. By December 9th, over 500 airplanes had been deployed to look for her. It was the first time airplanes had been used in a missing persons case. Still, the police found nothing. Desperate, they brought her beloved dog to the scene, hoping he could pick up her scent and lead the authorities to her. But all he did was whine when they arrived. Desperate for answers, the police tried to turn to her latest book for a clue, but could not find a copy. Only that the title was The Blue Train, and her brother-in-law was supposed to have the manuscript. He did not. The authorities reached out to motorists in the area and all breeds of search dog, even some common street mutts, to see if they could turn up a clue. Still nothing. The home security, I guess like the English home security himself, urged Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Dorothy L. Sayers to help in the search. Doyle used one of Christie's discarded gloves to clairvoyantly speak to the missing woman, while Sayers used the available clues. Both armchair sleuths came up cold. For 11 days, the police were baffled and were starting to consider her disappearance a suicide. Her husband had been having an affair with a much younger woman, and Christie had been feeling down, according to several people close to her. She had left 3 letters the night before she disappeared, one to her husband, one to her brother-in-law, and one to her maid. While her husband and her brother-in-law had burned their copies, the maid turned hers over to the police, though it just contained shopping instructions, no clues to where the writer was. But on December 15th, 1926, she was found at the Hydro Spa in Yorkshire. She claimed she had no memory of the events that led her there. Her husband even claimed she didn't know who she was. She had checked in under the name Miss Tressa Neal, which seemed to be just a name she had thought up in her apparent state of amnesia. But 2 years later, when Christie and her husband divorced, he married his lover, none other than Miss Tressa Neal.
Yeah, this is pretty wild and very significant in her life, it seems like, although it didn't really go public. Interestingly enough, there's an agathachristie.fandom.com, like fandom has its own, like umbrella, like I've used it before on cryptids and things like that. It has an Agatha Christie one, of course, and they have a great write-up on this that I kind of got my summary for it, and they note that Christie's own autobiography makes no mention of her disappearance. And one of her biographers, unauthorized biographer, Janet Morgan, believes that she really like her and some doctors believe that she just sort of had like a anxiety or a panic attack, essentially a crisis, like a kind of a life crisis. Here she was in her 20s at the time. No,
I thought
in
she
her
was
30s.
36 or
Yeah,
something,
she
wasn't
was
she?
born in 1890, and this happened in what, 26 or 25. So
26,
yeah,
yeah.
she was like in her late 30s. So yeah, very midlife crisisy. The way that this was going, it was kind of wild to see. But I really enjoy. I started listening to the audiobooks much like I did for Sherlock Holmes. I listened to the audiobooks a couple years ago, I think 2016 or 17. And I even just when we decided we were doing this, I was able to listen to the entirety. I finished it this morning, actually, of the first book, the audiobook. I love it. The actor Charles Armstrong narrates it, and he does a really good job. And if you haven't seen, there's a great BBC show that ended in like 2013. It ran, I think, from the 90s till 2013. They like came back a few years, and David Suchet, he's really great. He has a great strong voice. He does Poirot on that. Um, yeah, Christie has been super influential, and Poirot too. Christie, just like Conan Doyle, had a really strong and involved life. I mean, she herself was really busy, and she was involved in some way in both wars, kind of as a nurse. She was really big into things like toxicology, archaeology, um, pharmacology. She was really big in that, and it shows in her novels. In the first book, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, has to do with strychnine poisoning and all sorts of little things like that. There's a big emphasis on like the victim dying late in the night from the strychnine after consuming laced coffee or cocoa, but strychnine actually quickly, so they're trying to explain that. And it's really nice. A great part about the story too, if you've never watched or seen it, I think it shows more in the books than the show. I've only seen a couple episodes of the show. There's another main character, Hastings. He was a veteran of the war. He's an Englishman, and he sort of represents our point of view. He's very much the Watson, and I was reminded when I was reading it how Poirot like basically calls him an imbecile as much as he can. Like he's just like, "Oh, I have figured out that this could not be so." And Hastings like, "Really, Poirot? How could you figure that out?" And he's like, "Hastings, how could you not see, you dummy?" Like I'm just like, go easy on him. But it's good. Like they have a really strong friendship, and Poirot, I mean, he's an interesting character too. He's definitely like obsessive compulsive, and they show that in some interesting ways in adaptations. Kenneth Branagh, a couple years ago, he did The Murder at the Orient Express, and there's the Death of the Nile movie that's coming out. It's very modern. They're definitely taking some cues from the Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes stuff. It's not as like edgy, but like I love the Guy Ritchie stuff. We said that, but I watched the Murder on the Orient Express, and it was quite good. Kenneth Branagh's version is fun, and he does a great job. But yeah, it's great. The stories themselves are fantastic, and Christie is just a really interesting person, like just like Doyle. I mean, she was involved with so much. She came from an okay family. She had a great love for reading when she was young, and that definitely shows. She actually had a few kind of unsuccessful books originally, and then she was able in 1920, The Mysterious Affair at Styles was able to sort of come out, so she was able to really go there. And she kind of has like a love-hate relationship in the same way Doyle did. But she ended up the Poirot's last appearance was in 1975, just a year before her passing in
Oh,
76.
wow.
I know. Isn't that insane? I did not even realize that. Like you could have told me like, oh yeah, the last Poirot book was in 1812, and I would have been like, yeah. And but it's great. She was immensely famous. Poirot has been adapted. There was a play that was done, and then she was like, no, I'm gonna do it. So she wrote a play, countless movies, the successful BBC show, and a lot. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy these books. They hold up pretty well. There isn't too much uh, kind of asynchronous sentiments, but there is some. if you feel me on that. But it is quite good. In fact, like the video games are still like being pumped out. Cammy actually just got me there's a new one that just came out at the beginning of October. It's called The Early Cases of Hercule Poirot. So he's a young gentleman. I was reading, they kind of time it that a lot of his stuff was done in like it's kind of contemporary. I think he dies in the 1940s is what they kind of said it as, but of the way things were, she kept writing because people kept wanting it. So it was just really interesting. But yeah, I love it. These things are just great, and Christie herself was wild. And I wanted to talk a little more about her disappearance, but it truly kind of ends at that. It really seems to just come down to her husband essentially wanting to leave her. They even had, I think, at least one child.
They had a little girl, yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think she really didn't take that super great, but her second husband, she seemed to have lived a great life with, and that's where she got into archaeology. She traveled very frequently. She seemed like someone who would never read and or not read her own books and go to the movies. She really much wanted to live and loved traveling. She went to like the Middle East a lot, where she did a lot of fun digs, as they called them then. And
they call them that now too.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. I'm going on a dig later. Would you like to join me? But yeah, the Christie stuff holds up really well. There's a ton of modern adaptations. There's some really wild stories, both fictional and like kind of documentary, about her disappearance. Like there's some straight up like fiction that's just kind of based on her disappearance, and they turn it into a Christie like book. So it's kind of weird that they were doing that. But yeah, it's to show the late 1920s. Her life kind of seemed to go around, but after her remarriage, and she seemed to kind of reinvigorate herself and move on, and it's really cool. And I think her travels like really show again in the books and things like that. So it's a lot of fun. Like the Murder on the Orient Express, which is a great book and great film, that was done in 1934, and she was traveling all around the Middle East by train at that point for archaeology, and so she had a great idea of how to do that. And there's really cool. There's a lot of foreign elements in her books, and they're not just like kind of stuck. I kind of think like she probably did more for like UK Belgian relations than any other person in the world, because that's Hercule Poirot is Belgian. And there was a kind of I was reading, she kind of chose that because of the war. There was a connection to the Belgians, the incidents of the Germans attacking them and things like that. So there was already sort of a bond between the UK and Belgium, but it just worked out. And it's just fun. Poirot is such a funny little character, and whether you're reading it or watching it, it holds up really well. There's even a Halloween episode. I actually saved it on my like queue on my library thing. I'm gonna try and watch it. I'm sure it'll be fun. But yeah, so I think that about covers everything I have. I would highly recommend watching or reading or listening to any of the part, or playing on your computer or PlayStation. You can download Poirot games right now. It's either there's the older one, the ABC Murders.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's these newer ones. And I was looking, Cammy, I'll kind of attach this to the show and why I like Poirot. The new game especially emphasizes on like relating things. Poirot, he kind of like differentiates himself from Sherlock Holmes. Holmes is very observant and experienced. Poirot is very experienced, but he brings into like a psychological aspect more. He's more about like the people. Like at the beginning of the murder, kind of when Poirot first learns the murder, it takes a little time, and his friend Hastings calls him in. He's like, "Oh, I'll be careful." Hastings is like, "I'll be careful not to, mess up any footprints." And Poirot's like, "It doesn't matter. Like, what are we gonna do with the footprint? Don't worry about it." We got to look at other things. So Poirot's very practical, thinks logically. Sometimes like the books make me feel like, how was I supposed to know that, Poirot? How was I supposed to know that? But a lot of the times the connections are pretty authentic and fun, and there's a twist, like in the murder of the Styles case. There's a fun twist that doesn't feel too like Shyamalan-y, crazy and wild. It's pretty understandable, and you're like, oh yeah, absolutely. So I super encourage looking into the either the movies, the show, or the audiobooks, or reading it. You can do that too. You can read books. But Cammy, thanks for giving that up. This is Cammy's idea too when we were looking at all this. So I didn't really know if we were going to have a lot to talk about. But yeah, she's a
it was
figure.
one of my favorite episodes of Drunk History.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah,
because there was this one, and then there was something else on that one too that was just super interesting. I can't remember what it was now.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, we've done what was it? Mary Shelley with Frankenstein last week. We've got Christie and Poirot, and we began with Holmes, right? Wasn't that it? With Doyle, and we've got one more coming up. You'll see the last week of the month, right? Yeah, 27th, my birthday. That's when it's coming. So stay tuned for that. Let us know if you have any suggestions. We always appreciate it. Our description will have our link tree, which will give you all of our social media links. You can also hit us up, Mythstorie with an IE at gmail.com. Don't forget, if you're on YouTube, let us know what you think. Comment, like. We are wanting to ramp up the YouTubes a little more. So let us know how we can improve. Cammy, thank you.
Thank you, Bryant.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that covers it. Everyone, we will see you next time.
Oh.
Little gray cells.